Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pauper metagame with MSP. I just wanted to take this opportunity to update you on a little bit of Pauper news and some interesting tidbits, so here we go. There's a news article up on Channel Fireball by Brian DeMars. I should take this moment to point out that I do most of my shilling for CardSphere, but you know, I'm all in on the Pauper format wherever it might be promoted. You know, I'll throw a shout out. So anyway, this is an article by Brian DeMars talking about a small local game store. Like, I guess I shouldn't call it small, not small, but an LGS, a local game shop running a Pauper event. The only reason I said small is, you know, this wasn't like a Grand Prix, this wasn't Star City Games, this wasn't, you know, anything like that. This was just a game store running an event in Michigan. And the article points out that they had over 100 players. So that's pretty impressive, considering this wasn't like a situation where a bunch of people came for something else, such as maybe arguably a lot of people who play in the Pauper side events at a Channel Fireball Grand Prix might just be playing in the Pauper side event after they get done with the main event, or maybe some people who show up to trade and buy cards, sell cards, and then decide to hop in a Pauper tournament. Whatever the case may be, everyone that showed up for this event was showing up just for the Pauper event. So over 100 players for a Pauper tournament. Also, as the article points out, this wasn't just like a little 3-round Swiss thing. This was a real 8-round tournament with a top 8, which is pretty cool. Also, it's worth pointing out, because of the way things are set up right now, none of these players got to get Planeswalker points or any kind of official recognition from Wizards of the Coast, which I know may not be a big deal to a lot of people, but if this type of an event could get 100 people without being able to be registered as a format where people would get credit for playing in it, I would imagine you could get at least 10%, who knows, maybe 50%, maybe even 100% more players if Wizards would just acknowledge the format. And hopefully someday that'll happen. If it does, Pauper it's going to have another exponential giant growth leap like it's recently had from getting attention from different news outlets. But anyway, this was 100 Pauper, over 100 Pauper players showing up to play in a local game store Pauper event. The author of this article, Brian DeMars, didn't do so well in the format, but he still said that he had a great time. He breaks down the top 8, gives deck lists, and points out at this particular tournament 3 Boros Monarch decks, 1 Burn deck, 1 Izzet Blitz deck, 1 Mono Blue Tireless Tribe deck, 1 Dimir Control, and 1 Goblins deck. So a lot of aggressive stuff in the top 8, along with a Blue-Black Control and 3 Boros decks. It sounds like, I'm guessing, there were a lot of people who brought aggressive stuff to this event, and also I'm guessing there were a fair amount of these players who were showing up and playing that weren't deeply familiar with the Pauper metagame. And when you're not deeply familiar with the Pauper metagame, or any metagame, when you're not deeply familiar with any metagame, it's usually more likely that you'll grab some kind of aggro deck. Not because I don't believe the whole concept that it takes more skill to pilot a control deck or a mid-range deck than an aggro deck. I don't necessarily believe that. I do think you need more knowledge of the format to successfully pilot those decks. You need to understand how to properly execute your answers and how to properly react to things and understand what could be coming. And with an aggro deck, you just apply the pressure. And whatever happens, happens. It is very helpful to know things about the format, but it's not as imperative. For that reason, I'm guessing there was a disproportionate amount of aggressive decks at this format because of probably some significant percentage of players not being deeply familiar with the format. Having said that, the Pauper metagame's in a pretty aggressive place right now anyway, but we'll move along. If you wanna check out this full article and these deck lists, I will post that in the show notes so you can find it there. The last thing I wanted to point out, in addition to just drawing some attention to this article, which is drawing some attention to Pauper, I'm not going to read the whole article again. I'm going to post the link in the show notes so you can just go ahead and read this for yourself if you want. But I did want to read just one paragraph from the article that I think speaks volumes. Keep in mind, Brian DeMars is a pretty serious Magic player. This is a guy who's top 8'd at major events before. This is not like some casual noob or something like that. This is a real legit serious Magic player. Anyway, I'm going to read this one paragraph from Mr. DeMars from the article. Lastly, I'd like to say that Pauper has become one of my favorite formats in Magic, and it has nothing to do with it being cute, cheap, or casual. I've found the game to be among the most interesting of any format. There are a ton of decisions to be made. Based on what I saw from a 106-player Pauper event, I'd love to see the format opened up to competitive play for PPTQ, RPTQ, or Grand Prix tournaments. So, wow. I think that says a lot. I think there's a false perception out there from a lot of people that Pauper's like a gimmicky format but doesn't have a lot of depth or doesn't have good interactive gameplay. It's sort of second-class Magic. If these people could afford to play a real format, they'd be having way more fun. This is totally untrue. Not only is Pauper, yes, a budget format, which is really nice, it's also just a really sweet format that has really, really good... If you like to have interactive games, if you like to play in a format where there's a ton of variance in the type of decks you can play, there's room for brewing, it's just a fabulous format, and I really, really appreciate someone like Brian DeMars. I'll just kind of throw your bio out here real quick because some of you might not scan down to, after the article's over to read this, or you may not be familiar with him, but Brian, I'm just reading this from the bottom of the article from his credentials section. Brian DeMars has played Magic pretty much since the beginning. He has 3 Grand Prix top 8s with a win in Boston Worcester in 2012. He was also recently a 2015 Open champion in Indianapolis. So, yeah, I mean, I think if Brian DeMars is going to say Pauper is a sweet format, and by the way, other people like Todd Stevens, LSV, have also mentioned that Pauper is a very sweet format. So, yeah, check out the article. It's pretty cool. And as another quick side note, I also wanted to talk about this site I found. Well, MTG Stocks. This is actually not a site I found. I mean, I was familiar with MTG Stocks, but a friendly person on the Pauper Reddit pointed me in the direction of this as a tool to track Pauper foil prices, since that's I'm not really sure if or how to really do that very well on Goldfish. So I thought this is really cool because you can check daily and weekly changes to Pauper foil prices. And the reason why I think this is, worth paying attention to is because there's some really, really crazy stuff. Now, granted, most of the cards that are really worth a ton, like Galvanic Blast, for example, this is, of course, a card that has huge modern appeal with Affinity in Modern and that kind of stuff. But we're talking about a $30 foil common. I don't know if all of you are aware how crazy expensive some of these foil commons are. A card like Viridian Longbow is really interesting to me because this isn't played in a whole ton of EDH decks. It's not a modern card of any real significance. This is primarily just a Pauper card, Pauper sideboard card, and the foils pop today from 15 to 18, and I'm sure there's a lot of volatility in these foil prices, but these are priced around 20 bucks on eBay if you want to check that out. I just thought that was really interesting. An older card with only one foil printing that's a common that is up around the $20 mark based on Pauper demand, and there's not a ton of copies out there. So pretty fascinating stuff. Snap is not a card that's played in anything but Pauper, and this is really interesting to me because I actually think Snap might be worth picking up. I wish I had more random money to just throw it at these foils. At some point maybe I will, but I feel like $12 for this is not bad. We're talking about one of the oldest foil sets in Magic. Snap's not used in anything else, so most of this price has to just be based upon it being an older set, one of the first foil set, I believe, along with the new Pauper demand. So that's a little bit interesting. And if you look through this stuff, you'll see a lot of these price movements are interesting, and just some of the cards that are really expensive. It's just funny, the Gush at $38 might be crazy to some people, but considering I forget what Brainstorm is, but Brainstorm's really, the original foil Brainstorm is really, really pricey. So this gush, this $38 price tag may actually have more upward mobility. There's some other things on here. Some of these 7th edition foils, Goblin Matron, $80. 7th edition foil Duress, $18. Pretty wild stuff. So just if you're into this kind of stuff. By the way, these foil counterspells from Masters 25 for $250. You can find these for a bunch of these on floating around at $250. So this is a sweet deal. If you want to get some foil counterspells, I've been picking up a few of these for my Pauper decks. I really like it. If foil brainstorms get cheaper, I'll probably pick some of those up as well. But this is just, to me, this is really really interesting stuff. Diabolic Edict is a card I want to point out because there hasn't been a foil printing for this other than the Masterpiece that I'm aware of. So this is interesting, and I wouldn't buy these yet just because it's a foil common that's not really played much in anything except for Pauper. Maybe it's got some fringe legacy play to it, I don't know. But these common foils from Masters 25 should drift down. The only reason I pointed out the counterspell foils, if you're into pimping out your Pauper decks, is because I've been watching and they're not getting any cheaper. The price sort of crashed down to where it's at, I'm sure, with these initial massive box openings, but apparently the demand is outstripping the supply, and the prices are not skyrocketing, but they've been slowly creeping up. This was around $2 when the M25 launched, and so it doesn't seem to be going down, whereas a lot of the other foil commons are. And with a guaranteed foil in every pack, there's going to be a boatload of foil commons floating around. So I don't recommend buying in on any of that stuff right now, except for Counterspell, which is just it's a truly iconic card, and this is not a bad price point. It's probably also worth pointing out there will be some amount of foil Counterspells also forthcoming from the new Jace Spellcaster deck box, or I don't know what you call it. It's the little Spellcaster box that has a foil Jace a regular Jace, well, a Jace Bellerin in it, along with 7 other cards, and one of the cards will randomly be a foil. So I guess statistically speaking, if it's evenly weighted, 1 out of every 8 of those boxes will include a foil counterspell. So I don't know what that's going to do with prices, but I believe right now this is one of the cheaper counterspells you can get in foil. And I also think that those counterspells that come out, because you'll only get 1 foil counterspell in about every 8 boxes, I'm guessing they're not going to really be all that cheap. So anyway, I don't know, make of it what you will. But this is an interesting resource, and if you're interested in Pauper Finance, then I think the older cards that aren't necessarily likely to see reprints anytime soon, and only have a single foil printing, and it's been a while. I especially like Pauper commons that have an older foil printing and have been reprinted a ton in supplemental sets. For example, all of these artifact lands like Tree of Tales, these have seen a lot of reprints in the Commander products. I guess this isn't really a great... I guess Tree of Tales actually hasn't seen that much of a reprint. Let's see. So let's try Great Furnace. Maybe that's a better one. Okay, so Great Furnace was reprinted in Plane Chase. It's getting reprinted right now in the Dual Deck Elves vs. Inventors, and it was printed in Commander 2014. So... and this is showing up as a foil from Commander 2014, but I think this is a fluke. I don't believe there was actually a foil printing. So there's only 1 foil printing, but we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 total printings of the card. So this is an ideal target, something like this. Although not necessarily Great Furnace, but Great Furnace is tricky because it's already up to around a $12, $14, $20 card already. Floating between $10 and $20. I don't expect these to get any cheaper anytime soon, but they're already really expensive. That's a lot of money to drop on a foil common, but hey, if you want to, go for it. But not necessarily to point to Great Furnace specifically, but just as a case example, I'm looking for stuff like this, foil commons that see play, and at least, you know, tier 2-ish looking Pauper decks that have been reprinted several times but only have one foil printing. And the reason for that is I feel like a card that's seen a bunch of reprints at common that doesn't necessarily need quote unquote, in air quotes, another reprint because there's so many in circulation already, but there's that foil printing, and if that all adds up, then there's a reasonable chance it won't get shoved into a master's set if it's not going to supply that much value anyway. Also, something like Great Furnace has this other factor where putting artifact lands into a master set could happen, but there'd have to be the right kind of theming or purpose, and that also could be a little tricky for that to seem like it really matters. And if it doesn't, you're just putting it in for value, and they might just figure that at this kind of a price point it's more useful, and these continue to randomly shove these into supplemental products. All of that is basically just to say that looking for indicators that this won't get shoved into a master's product, and that hopefully over the next few years, if you buy into these Mirrored and Great Furnace, you know, foil, for example, you're hoping it's not going to see another foil reprint for a while. And I suppose even if you do see another foil reprint, the original will probably hold a fair bit of its value since it is the original. Anyway, that's all for today. Appreciate it. Hope this is useful to some of you. Peace.